So my name's Liz Hampton, and I'm the co-founder and editor-in-chief of BE News, which is the only quality free-to-air news service that covers the entire built environment industry. Thank you for joining us today for this highly topical debate exploring the new development landscape and how nature-based standards help development teams navigate the practical challenges they face when creating high-quality, resilient places. Now, today we're not going to talk about hypotheticals. We're going to focus on live projects and drill down into the detail to assess where teams have encountered uncertainty, competing priorities, or design constraints, and how they have used building with nature to work through these issues. I'm delighted to see so many of you are joining us for today's webinar, which is being recorded, as Eleni said, and will be shared with you in a few days' time. Please let us know via the webinar chat function who you are, where you work, and what you do, so we can fully involve you in the conversation. Now, shortly, we're going to hear from our panel of expert speakers who are going to talk about some of the projects they're currently working on and about some of the general challenges and opportunities in delivering nature-led development. As well as asking them questions, I will be asking you in our audience several poll questions, so make sure your fingers are at the ready. And after the panel discussion, you'll have the opportunity to put your questions to the panel as well. So get your thinking caps on and start sending us your questions. Today's webinar could not be more timely given the challenging political backdrop, both in the UK and globally, and the growing need for nature-led development. Joining us today to share their insights into how to deliver high-quality, resilient places are four leading experts in this space. Our co-host, Eleni Polychroniadou, who is the CEO of Sintali, an environmental verification company that is focused on bringing transparency and credibility to the real estate sector and that owns and operates the Building with Nature standard. We've also got Igloo Regeneration Development Director, Gary Watts, who is responsible for urban design and development delivery in Glasgow. And we've got SoSustainable consultant Carol Somper, a Building with Nature approved assessor who over a 30-year career has gained unique consultancy experience promoting sustainability and applying it to business and planning, including place-based community engagement and working for the UK government on natural resource management at the landscape scale. And finally, last but not least, we have Treglown Regional Director and Head of Landscape Architecture, Isabelle Carter, a Building with Nature approved assessor who has developed a broad range of project experience with the practice since she joined in 2010, with emphasis on conceptual design and collaborative multidisciplinary projects within the Place Studio. Now, before we get the discussion underway, I have the first of two of four poll questions I'd like to put to everyone who has joined the webinar. All you need to do is click the response you most agree with. So here's the webinar. I'm going to read it out for you. How would you describe your organisation's experience with nature-led design? Are you just starting to explore it? Do you have some experience on a few projects? Is it embedded across most projects and core to your approach? Is it not currently a focus intentionally, or have you never considered this approach before? So please vote now. It's going to take a couple of minutes for those votes to come in. How are we doing on the votes?
We've got about 70% participation.
Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad.
Thank you all.
And we're going to see the result in a second. Eleni, what do you think they're going to say?
Well, I can see the answer, so I'm cheating.
Oh, that's not fair. I can't yet.
All right. I'm going to close it in 3, 2, 1. Some interesting results.
Oh, that I don't know. I was expecting that. I suppose. So we've got some experience on a few projects, 43. 43. Is that 43%? No, it's 43 out of the 105 that voted.
41%, yeah.
And then embedded across most.
28%.
That's not a bad percentage, actually. That's perhaps higher than I was expecting it to be, but I think so is just starting to explore it, slightly higher than we were perhaps hoping. Eleni, again, what do you make of that response?
I think it's great. I think we've got a quarter of our audience that is in the beginning part, and we've got a very good chunk, so almost 65% with some experience through to maturity. So really quite wide range of experience, maturity, and hopefully lots of insights from our panel.
And it looks like a few were on a fact-finding mission as well, because there were three, I think, there who have not done anything in this space at all. So it's down to us today to convince them they should be doing something. And now for our second poll question. What do you think the biggest barrier is to delivering high-quality, nature-led outcomes? So is it unclear or overlapping requirements, concerns around cost and viability, a lack of shared understanding across internal teams, a lack of clear business case, a lack of demand or value from end users, or limited confidence from planners or stakeholders? That's quite a tough one to answer. I think I know what you think the answer is, Eleni, but I'm not sure what the audience are going to think. I wonder if we get a few more responses this time, although the response rate was fantastic, wasn't it, to the first one?
Yeah.
We had 105, I think,
Mhm.
responded of the 150 on. Don't be shy, everybody else. Please share your thoughts. We're really keen to know what you're thinking on this one. You're
Absolutely.
seeing
And
it
we
going
want
up and
to,
down now, are you? Well,
yeah, we want to use these concerns and these areas to really focus our conversation today. So thank you to everyone who's answering. We're at 70% participation, so we'll give it one more minute for a couple more people to get through. I'm not surprised by the answers, but I will show them in just a couple of
I mean,
minutes.
there are a lot of barriers, aren't there? Let's face it. This is not a sort of a straightforward, you want to do it, therefore you just go ahead and do it, and the first step is obvious. Um, so all of these, I think, are really valid concerns. Let's see what the responses are then. Okay, then I'm going to be honest with you, that has surprised me. I thought it was going to be lack of a clear business case, but it's concerns around cost and viability. And actually, that makes so much sense, doesn't it? That that's the top concern. And it really is the top concern. It's almost half of the respondents have gone for that. Limited confidence, that's good. That we don't have too many there. Lack of demand, also. I mean, it's
20%.
it's not nothing, but it's not too bad, is it? And lack of shared understanding, that's actually pleasingly low as a response, isn't it? Some really interesting feedback there. Thank you very much, everybody who voted. And we'll, as Elaine said, we'll pick up on some of those responses later on in the conversation. Now we want to look at some case studies and talk about some of the projects that our panelists are working on at the moment. So to get the discussion underway, we're going to talk about some specific projects and find out more about the challenges faced and solutions that people came up with. First, I've got a question for Gary. Now, Igloo is known for integrating nature and sustainability into its developments. Some of your projects have gone so far as to get an independent verification of these achievements through the Building with Nature accreditation scheme. Could you briefly introduce Dundas Hill and explain why Igloo chose to pursue Building with Nature on a project where you already had a strong internal approach to sustainability and design?
Thanks, Liz, and hello everyone. I think I can start by saying Dundas Hill, it's a 27-acre former distillery in the north of Glasgow. Andy, if you've that first slide, I think you can probably get a sense of the scale of this. So this is a former distillery, and what we're now trying to do is transform it into a 600 home new community. So it's essentially about as brown as brownfield gets, really. It's absolutely classic brownfield. I think, Andy, in the next slide, what you'll get a little hint of is that what we did before the housing came in, that was the first platform to be done, was we put in the infrastructure first, including the landscape, the main spine landscape. So what you can start to see here is the planting of over 2,000 trees into the place. And when you're building a new community, the value of that to help attract people, attract those pioneers to a location is so fundamental. And you can also see even some public artwork we did on some of the industrial relics there. When we are delivering these projects, we use our own footprint process, which is an internal process that covers 6 dimensions of community and well-being, upfront carbon and circularity, and place in nature. So we're not just completely nature-led, so it's kind of part of a very holistic approach. But that process has its own internal review. But essentially, that can be seen as marking your own homework, which is a good thing to do, but probably not the most credible thing. So we use external accreditation, really. It gives us scrutiny, insight, and I think it challenges us as well to do things differently and perhaps do things better than we would otherwise. That's really why we use accreditations like Building with Nature.
Do you think too many people are currently marking their own homework?
I think there's a lot of it, but with good intentions, because there's a quite a crowded space of accreditations out there. From it seems to be ever increasing. From Building Nature's a good and now becoming established, but you've got BRE, Home Quality Mark, uh, Building for a Healthy Life. There's different things out there, so sometimes you're not quite sure which one is going to be the best one for your scheme, but it's definitely a very positive thing to do because it just gives you more confidence that you're doing the right thing, I think.
So clearly, it's important not to mark your own homework. Can you just tell us, give us a bit more detail about the role that Building with Nature has played in providing credibility, confidence, and external recognition for the approach that you were already taking at Dundas Hill?
Yeah, I think it's been very valuable. I think there's three or four different stakeholders or different places where it does add up. I think for me, customers is actually a really important one. The people who are going to move into a new neighborhood. I think Building with Nature's helped us give them confidence that we're trying to do something good for the planet from an industry that's probably not got the greatest of reputations. So that's been helpful. I think planners and regulators. I noticed that in the poll, I think only 6% kind of mentioned limited confidence of planners and stakeholders in landscape and design. But for us, if Andy flicks on to the next slide, and it's my last one, you'll be pleased. But this was in amongst the housing, a sunken garden space we put in that it's a space where SUDS infrastructure coexists with biodiversity, that coexists with an amenity space for the residents and community to gather. But that was quite hard to get approved, or I'm being probably quite polite, it was very, very hard to get approved. And Building with Nature gave, I think, the planners and the regulators some confidence that we were designing something that, was where what we should be doing this now. So I think for us that was really, really, really helpful.
So it
I
sort of
think,
validated the scheme and showed that it was up to standard. I mean,
yeah,
what a transformation these slides are presenting, aren't they? I mean, it's from that initial image. What did you say? It was the brownest of brownfield
yeah,
sites to this.
it's
Extraordinary.
and it's in a neighbourhood where it's a brownfield site in an area that is still industrial and still transforming. So nature's got such a key role in there to humanize this place. That's it. To make it feel as if it's a place you'd want to live. That's it been its massive value for us. But the accreditation, because it's easy for me to say to regulators, "Oh, we're going to do something great in here." But everybody knows landscape can quite often get cut in the process. The
Mm.
longer the job goes on and funding and costs are getting tight, landscape can be the thing that suffers. But we said, no, no, we've got validation and we're going to validate it after construction finishes. So we will show you that we have delivered what we promised to do. And that was working with Carol through that process. And I think the final kind of benefit of the accreditation for me is it should be with funders, should be with those that are investing in the project, including ourselves. There's a bit of a fixation on EPC ratings still. That seems to be the only metric, really. It's all about operational carbon and EPC. But there's a lot more to sustainability than that. And I'm hoping that Building with Nature, gains more traction and more momentum because I think funders should be looking beyond that very technical, this is it, this is what good performance is an EPC rating. It's far more than that. So that's it's been beneficial for us, and I hope it becomes more beneficial on that one.
That's brilliant. Before I bring Carol in, I've got a couple of questions here from the audience. They're jumping in early, which is really good.
Oh.
Sarah Eglinton has noted that she said she's surprised to hear that it was very hard to get the garden area approved. Why was this? What were the barriers?
Essentially, the main purpose of that space to start with was the suds pond, and I know north and south of the border can be slightly different, but we use something called the Sewers for Scotland manual, and suds ponds are historically fenced, and they are historically placed at the edge of the residential layout. It's almost don't go near the suds pond, and we tried to turn that on its head and said, why don't we place suds, nature, biodiversity right in the heart of the homes and actually make that the centerpiece? And that, whilst it seems kind of obvious when you see this image, it just took about 2 years of quiet going, guys, can we please do this? Can we please do this? And there was a fence round that up until quite late in the day. And we're going, oh, come on. So it's, I feel for everyone involved in the process because it's a really good question because we've become very cautious as an industry and very checklist led. And sometimes you want to do,
Understandably, though,
yeah,
understandably.
it's a big thing now. But somewhere along the line, you've still got to have vision and you've still got to have some drive to do things differently. And when you want to do that, it can be hard to get through. The computer says, no, we've not done it before. So we're
Fair
not
enough. Now,
happy.
I want to bring Carol in here. I appreciate there's some other questions that come in. They're great questions, but I want to make sure that we don't lose momentum here with the conversation. And we'll come back to your questions hopefully post event. I'm promising something now that Eleni's going to have to deliver. If we're making a note of this question, obviously recording everything. So hopefully somebody will come back to you with responses to some of those other questions afterwards. Carol, bringing you in here from your perspective as the Building with Nature assessor on Dundas Hill, how did the project compare with what you typically see coming forward? And where did the Building with Nature process add most value in shaping or strengthening what was already a strong scheme?
I have to say that Igloo are the best client you could hope for because they have such a strong sustainability ethos and they are very ethical and they are really trying to make the outcome do what it says on the tin. So I'd worked with Gary on one other scheme. We'd collaborated very closely from the beginning. And when I was brought in for Dundas Hill, this was as assessor for the Reserve Matters stage, so it was detailed design. And you've seen, everybody can see from the almost like starting with a completely blank sheet, it was the brownest of the brownfield sites. So there was lots of potential. And I think that for me as an assessor, also the other thing that's important here is it was part of a big collaborative project, and the community outreach team, Kevin Murray Associates, I've worked with before on the community outreach side, and they are so thorough in making sure that they bring members of the local community in onto site to walk around, to see the designs as they evolve, and to take a really active part in coming up with a design that meets the needs of people. I was very confident as the assessor that it would be good. So my role was to make sure that the all of the material, the reports, and particularly the design and access statement were very coherent. And my role as the assessor is to make sure that compliance against all of the standards comes through very strongly. And I'm looking particularly for words that say the design will, not aims to or should, but will. And the bog garden is absolutely brilliant because of the topography of the site being so very steep and hilly that the suds had to be right. And I was very keen I wanted to have cross sections and profiles to show how this would work under different conditions. If you've got a very wet, stormy year, how well is the water going to sit here and how is it going to drain away? And from a biodiversity perspective, and you're looking at carbon sequestration, wet, boggy ground is fantastic for carbon sequestration. So this will never completely dry out. And you can see from the picture that it's accessible. It's easy to walk into, to sit and enjoy. And the planting is just absolutely brilliant for bringing in pollinators. The tree species are fantastic for giving you vertical height. And again, it's good for bringing wildlife in, but it will always add some degree of shade in the summer, and it's going to be controllable. So Igloo are particularly good at creating these spaces and meeting the community requirement for shared social spaces for growing or planting, or for just meeting and socializing, so that you get a very, very intimate and very comfortable environment in the design. And if you go back to one of the previous pictures, you can see how they've started to bring in blocks of planting, and the suds feature down the main road where you can see the car. There's a channel, a gully that will act as a really effective swale. There are areas where there's grass planting on steep slopes that can be they're going to be managed as meadows in the summer. So again, you've got lots of potential for bringing in creating a semi-natural habitat, grassland habitat that just wasn't there before. And the area is so industrial, or it's a very urban area. This is creating such a fantastic green space. So it's really important to make sure that the assessment goes in as a draft with the planning application, so that the planners can see what the independent assessor is saying about the design, and is adding value to what Igloo are doing in an independent way. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
And there's another type of value we should really talk about here, and that's the kind of commercial value, isn't there? Bringing Gary back in, and Norman Courts has asked this question about how the overall viability stacks up in this sort of location. And we know that with these sort of schemes where there's a sort of nature-led approach, there can be some pushback. Does it affect impact of viability? How expensive is this, Gary?
I think I mean it's a big question, but I mean for us at the core of viability is trying to make a neighborhood a place that people are going to choose to live in. So, nature in this location was one of the main drivers that was going to change the perception and encourage people to come here. So, without getting into pounds, shillings, and pence on it, it was the thing that was going to give buyers the confidence. Because for me, sustainability, I think beauty is still a major part of that discussion, because the most beautiful places are quite often the most sustainable. People are going to look after them, they're going to want to be there over time. So that's what we're trying to create, is those places that have got value over time.
But Gary, some people would say that that's a nice to have, not a need to have, something that's aesthetically pleasing. How do you what's your response to people who talk about this not being need to have?
I think, I mean, gosh, we're kind of living in what I'd call a poly crisis just now. There's a lot of red alarm bells going off. So the idea of nature in any way being a nice to have rather than a must have, I just can't quite, doesn't really compute with me. But, I understand some folks may challenge that. But kind of going back to that previous point, the idea of creating something beautiful, that we'll be developing this out over years, this project. So it's not just go in, build it, do some landscape that you hope was going to grow and maybe be managed by a property manager okay over the years. We're thinking we could be 10 years here, so we want the landscape to be, fantastic, a real explosion of nature right at the edge of the city. So for us, it was absolutely core to the project DNA. So, if you're trying to reimagine how we're going to live in the 21st century. I think nature's just at the absolute heart of that. So, that's I'm
So
not
it
sure
is
what else to
absolutely a
say.
need to have as far as
Yeah.
you're concerned. Carol, I know you have some concerns over the level of ambition you sometimes see with projects. I mean, this one seems to demonstrate a lot of ambition. But where do you think with other projects there's scope for them to push a little bit further?
Well, this one in particular, because it was so empty, whatever's coming in is going to be better, but why not be as ambitious as you can, and being beautiful and aesthetically pleasant to live in doesn't cost more. It's part of the design, and it, it's got to be something that's going to work well over time. And I think all developers and planners have to think about this. What's it going to be like in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 30 years' time? And it's only going to get better and better. So
Ambitious though this is, what's it missing then, Dundas Hill?
the and this occurred to me with in retrospect. There were about 5 or 6 bird bricks went in. There were probably hardly any bird life at all on the site before, and it was only after I'd had a great weekend in Marseille with some friends. It's in the middle of the city. It's got tower blocks. It's very, very metropolitan. In the evening, you don't just get dozens, you get hundreds of swifts coming in and flying above. And I thought, why only 5 or 6 bird bricks here? There could be so many more, because if you make space for nature, nature will come in. And that's what we've got to think for any site. What could you get in here with not very much effort at all?
Very briefly, Gary, your response to that? Why no
Yeah.
bird
I,
bricks or so few?
I think it's a good question, and tying it back to your first poll about where people are in this kind of journey of embedding nature. For us, there's so much regulation and standards out there. It's hard for the team. The ambition's there, but sometimes you're spending, could be your EPC to your future home standard to upfront carbon, home quality mark, whatever it is. There's so many bits of paperwork and governance and standards that it's quite hard at times just to stop and think, you know, are we doing the best we can do? So we undoubtedly will miss stuff, and as people start their own projects, we will miss stuff, but you've just got to do your best. And,
Mm.
it's never going to be 10 out
There
of
are always
10.
lessons to learn, aren't
Yeah.
there?
And,
And
and I think we've got a final thing. We've got to be honest about that. And that's kind of fun. When you're doing new neighborhoods, you're going to be 10, 15 years in there. So you've got to stop and learn and think, okay, let's do better in the next phase and do better again. So that's okay not to get everything right. Just do your best. That's fine.
conscious of time, wanting to bring Isabelle in shortly. Quickly, finally, Carol, where does the building with nature process help resolve some of these issues that we've identified?
I think because the standards are so well designed, the key characteristics cross-reference across all of the standards, having a fresh pair of eyes to come in and work with all members of the team to get them to think about how you can get stuck in a groove. You can just go on remote, autopilot, and you're doing a bit. But having that fresh pair of eyes come in and say, well, hang on a minute, you said this was going to be climate resilient. I can see it is, but you haven't explained how. You need to explain how. So to get the first time I worked with Gary on Vox Riverside in Sunderland, I challenged the landscape team to absolutely articulate what they meant by a climate resilient design. And it flipped completely from saying nothing to saying exactly how the planting was going to be have coolness in summer, to protect against winter rains, to be effective for suds, etc., etc. So that was brilliant. Another time, it was a small development in West Yorkshire in quite a rural area, but the scheme looked terribly ornamental and terribly garden-like. So it was, again, come on, guys. Let's get something that's a lot more natural looking, that's going to actually be better for the residents coming in. It's not just because they had a very round pond with a brick edge and a few chairs and mown grass. What they ended up with after we had a discussion about it was a much better planting list of really beautiful perennials that were going to attract pollinators in a much more drift-like planting around the central area, and similar in a way to Dundas Hill. Instead of having just a fixed depth pond, it became a pond with a bog end. It was going to be a much more responsive feature for drainage in an area that does get affected by heavy rainfall and surface water runoff. And there was a tree that had to be felled. It was a dead tree. The design team then made that a feature. So the walkway for the residents into the informal garden area, their green space, was a big log for kids to play on, and some piles of dead wood to attract insects, and it was just so much better.
So it's a much more granular approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic. Eleni, just bringing you in here very briefly. You've heard some really interesting insights from Gary and Carol. From your perspective, why is independent accreditation becoming increasingly important for people?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Gary hit the nail on the head when he said marking your own homework. The fact that Igloo can stand up and say, look what we've done, look what we've achieved, and someone's checked it. And it's not just us saying that we're fantastic, but actually someone's checked the impact and the assessment and really looked at it holistically. I'm obviously the accreditation person, so I'll always be an advocate for that. But I think in everything that we do, whether it's in school, someone checks your work. In sustainability, someone checks your work. In your taxes, someone checks your work. There's an element of having that verification. And I think what's been really great about the Dundas Hill example is not only has Igloo taken a step up and really shown leadership in this, we've actually got people in this webinar that live there and have said that the impact is real and have shared that in the chat, which I think is wonderful.
That's fantastic
to hear. So it's not just an accreditation for the sake of getting a piece of paper, but it's actually about the outcomes and making sure that all of the steps have been taken to get the results. Because at the end of the day, accreditations are simply a process, but it's the results, the outcome, and the credibility that really matters. And it's all just about creating and facilitating that so more and more people can do it.
And it seems to me, from what we've heard, it guarantees a better outcome and a more holistic outcome also. Thanks, all three of you. I'm bringing Isabelle in now. You've got several projects you want to share your insights on today. So for my first question to you, Isabelle, how does the Building with Nature framework and having trained assessors help bring clarity when balancing requirements such as biodiversity net gain and climate resilience?
Yeah, thank you. So when I was the initial assessor to be trained in our practice, and quite quickly I realised how the standards framework really aligns with how landscape architecture and the collaborative design element with all the with civils and ecology and the design team as a whole can really bring the meaningful green infrastructure to really support the project throughout. So we've actually made the conscious decision to train a significant number of our team, and this was for a couple of reasons. One, mainly to make sure that we had capacity alongside the fact that we're a very busy design practice, and we wanted to be able to give the assessment work a real kind of capacity, but also, as been mentioned before, making sure that in terms of having internal assessors, the marking of your own homework piece is acknowledged, that we make sure that we have a non-project individual doing the assessment if we're doing our own projects. And also, I mean, that's an example for Glenn Koch. I don't know if Andy wants to jump on to the next slide. But essentially, which is one of the examples I'm going to talk about, but also where we are external assessors for external design teams, it also gives a robustness to and capacity again to our team to make sure that we're doing that to our full ability and want to be able to provide that. So as the example that I'm going to talk about in Hainbury Nature Reserve. So I think also it provides a step back. So the framework really provides you a step back to purely focus on the green infrastructure and how that can be used integrally, as has been kind of described by Gary and Carol. And the thing is that the framework kind of helps tease out the questions really early on as to how you can kind of directly tackle and include features that are going to have a meaningful impact. And make a difference from the outset of the project. We've also found that the framework has helped look at issues such as BNG, biodiversity net gain, and climate resilience and well-being in a holistic way. And it gears the project towards thinking about the conflicting aspects sometimes where we have natural features versus budgets constraints. So it kind of really flushes that out as a conversation, as you know, as the polls reflected, that the budget's really something that is often under a lot of pressure on every project effectively. And the other thing that we found using the framework that's really helpful is that once you've put in your in for audit, you get a summary of award, which effectively gives you almost like a roadmap of the things you need to do next in order to maintain your award and make sure that you're not dropping things along the line. And again, there's a temptation in, you know, if you don't have that checklist almost to help you focus on the topics that are relevant to your scheme, that you know, those don't get left by the wayside or forgotten or ignored or kind of, you know, through no fault of the project itself. Just, you know, the budget constraint again is something that comes in there. And I think the other thing to say just on that question is that initially we found that if we're able to help developers and contractors understand how the framework works, they see it less as a tick box exercise, where some of the other, you know, so BREEAM can be seen as a bit of a tick boxing exercise. However, with our client for Glencross School, so Wilmot Dixon are the applicant for that, they've really come on board with how to use the standards, and they can see how implementing the recommendations and making sure that we keep on track once we get to the 12 months post 12 months check, that these things are actually going to happen for the benefit of the school.
So those benefits become writ large, don't they?
Yeah.
Briefly, because we are sort of I'm conscious of time here. What have been the most significant design or planning constraints your team has had to address on projects you've worked on? And can you share a few examples, please?
Yeah, sure. So on Glencross School here, which is a primary school in Wales, Andy, if you could jump to the next slide, because it gives you an overview of kind of the site's layout. This is kind of an early sketch that we did, but it certainly embeds the principles of connecting with nature. So as I said, Wilmot Dixon are the client, the applicant client, and we committed to using the standards at stage 3 design, which is quite late on in the process, and later than, you know, potentially you would maybe want to use those. But
why so late?
Sorry?
Why so late?
It was mainly because of when they came on board with the project. So the school had you know, and the local authority had been kind of made aware of the building with nature standards. But yeah, it was sort of when they were actually able to get fully involved. And so yes, this did present some challenges. With the design being, you know, relatively fixed in layout. However, using the framework, it was able to kind of identify key advantages and make sure that green infrastructure could support the scheme for people in nature and the community, there was a real want and need to kind of include features that would provide for the community. I think also as this is a full awards, that there's the subject to sign off feature, we were able to kind of provide Wilmot Dixon with a tracker for them to make sure that they're meeting the targets and recommendations that have given the award in the first place for the full award effectively. So I can give you a couple of real examples on this scheme. So, for example, there was a query around whether the correct planting mixes were identified for kind of flood and drought tolerance and resilience in the tree species especially. So that's something that they're kind of focusing on to make sure that's brought through. And also a query around something that Carol has been talking about the community engagement and how can you make this an effective usable space. So including community gardens, there was kind of a risk highlighted that if there's no detailed conversation with the local communities about how they're going to be used and managed, the potential is that they will be provided but not provided adequately, or that they would be provided and people wouldn't really be aware that they're there, etc. So it's kind of giving the design team that nudge to make sure that they're not forgotten, and that process needs to include engagement to make sure that suitable features are included. It also highlighted queries around exactly being explicit about funding of management. So the management will be provided by an external management company. But again, schools are under a lot of pressure budget-wise. So being clear about what funding is available to make sure that has the adequate resources for the long term. And also ensuring that the connectivity to the wider landscape isn't filtered down within the scheme. So for example, there was a weakness identified between the east-west link to wider areas where there's ancient woodland. So just making sure that the features that have been included will be included and won't be kind of value engineered out because they don't have the money to put a tree in, etc. So
it's kind of a creation of an overt roadmap that embeds the principles and means you really have to follow through on everything. Thanks very much for sharing those insights. Can I bring Eleni back in here now? What did you make of those responses? And from your perspective, how does certification help turn good intentions around nature-led design into something tangible and that you can actually see and rely on the ground?
Absolutely. Well, I don't want to repeat what everyone else has said, but I think what's really stands out to me in this conversation is the difference between the two different examples of projects that we've looked at. We've looked at an industrial site and we've looked at a school, which are very, very different profiles, and yet both took a nature-led approach. And I think the power of accreditation, and in this particular case around nature, is that nature is so complicated and it's very difficult to communicate. It's very difficult to think about what are the different elements and make sure that you don't have negative impacts from doing one thing but not considering the other. So in this case, what you see through frameworks like Building with Nature and others out there is that it's trying to simplify all of the different components and help with that roadmap that Isabelle talked about, and bring it all together and give that guidance to break it down and help people focus on how to maximize all of the co-benefits of bringing nature into developments. And I think that's been a key theme of what we've heard today, is that all of the investments in SUDs, investments in trees, investments in connectivity to landscape ultimately bring social impact. They bring impact to the community. They bring impact to the people that are actually going to use that space, which is ultimately what it's all about. But it can be done in a way that makes sense and adds value to each of the projects. And again, it's so interesting to see what the value looks like in different places, in education, in a residential, in a brownfield, and bringing all of that together. So I think it shows. Sorry, I was going to say, I just think it shows the value in different ways.
Yeah,
I know. I know I'd run out of time for my next example, but if you could just put it on the screen, because it's a nature reserve and it's a private landowner who, you know, has really invested in making sure that this happens, and also the framework has been so useful from a planning perspective. There's a lot of, like you were saying, that the conflicting aspects of a design can really be addressed really successfully in using the building with nature framework in order to get the best outcomes. You know, there could have been areas where the client wanted to give up on this because it was a flight path for MOD airplanes. So if they could have given up on the encouraging birds to the site, but because of the building with nature framework, they found a way around it to make sure that the habitats are balanced and still provide enough inclusion for species that don't conflict with the flight path effectively. So just wanted to add that. Thank you.
No, that's a great scheme, and actually, hopefully, post this webinar, we can share some more of your insights there. We don't have time, unfortunately, today. In terms of, I want to put some questions to the panel myself in a second. I want to also thank Gary for responding to people's questions whilst we were having that great presentation from you, Isabelle. Now, before I start asking you one or two questions, got another poll for everybody who has joined the webinar today, and that is, what do you think is the biggest benefits of using a nature-led framework? And your options are here. It demonstrates compliance with policy requirements, community engagement, sales and marketing to prospective customers, alignment with sustainable finance requirements, or reduce internal friction and improve cross-collaboration across teams. So if you can respond now. So I'm wondering whether some of the buzz phrases from the conversation we've had so far will inform the response to this poll. Let's see. So we've got 150 people or so on the webinar at the moment. Let's see how many people we can get responding this time. What are we seeing? What are you seeing in front of you, Eleni? I don't get to see this.
Yeah. So 50% response increasing, and actually very varied responses, which I think is interesting. And it's kind of getting to this question, which I know is in the chat, around value, around cost cutting, around, how do you really get these decisions to be nature-led up front? And I think ultimately linking it back into, well, what are the benefits of doing this, and why are people doing this? It links into that conversation, because if we know exactly what the value being provided to different stakeholders is, then it's also a lot easier to have those conversations early on in the design phase. So
you're forcing people to make one choice, whereas I'm assuming quite a lot of people would like to tick some or all of these.
Picking the best response.
Yes. Well, what have we got? What have they said?
All right, I'm going to show the results now.
I'm biting my lip in excitement here and anticipation. Oh, it is quite split, isn't it? So we've got an equal number saying reduce internal friction and demonstrate compliance with policy. Then just below that, well, we've got two equal again, but lower. Community engagement has come out lower than I was expecting. Alignment with sustainable finance. I mean, that's interesting. And the lowest, sales and marketing. What do we reckon to that response? Is that what we expected?
Well, I think if I can take this maybe as a starting point, because I know there's a question in the chat around demand, and if we're seeing people looking for these frameworks, or if the current political situation and economic situation is playing into that. There is still interest in accreditation around nature, and I think the biggest challenge that we hear from a standards owner is the ability to demonstrate the value to different customers, hence the question around benefit. And I think it's really interesting that sales and marketing came out as the lowest in terms of benefit. And coming back to what Gary was saying around the value of having the accreditation, but also taking this approach, is ultimately to drive interest in the project and to increase that opportunity of people either being tenants or buyers of land. So I think there is a disconnect between how we communicate the value of nature-led development to the market to different stakeholders, whether it's financiers, whether it's regulators, whether it's potential buyers or tenants. So the interest is there, but the ability to convert it into commercial value and into that final decision-making process is the friction point. Politics hasn't really changed the market landscape for nature-led development. There has been a lot going on in local and national government, and there is, I think, more pressure being put on councils and being put on the local government. But in terms of the development side, nature continues to be that area of interest of maybe I should do this, but I'm not really sure how to do it and how to translate it into something that stakeholders will buy into. Hence why we did this webinar, to really look at real life examples that it can be done and the case can be made, and people aren't doing this out of the goodness of their heart. They're doing it because it is the right thing to do, but also because it brings value in so many different ways across every type of stakeholder involved in a development.
That's a great answer. And it is interesting, isn't it, this whole commercial imperative as well that needs to be demonstrated now. So we know that we want to see more nature-led developments, but it has to be able to wash its face commercially, or more than that, actually maybe be reframed as something that is is going to be commercially beneficial. I mean, what did everybody else make to the responses to the poll question? Quickly bringing in Gary here.
I was probably slightly surprised that the sales and marketing was the lowest, but that it's possibly down to the audience. I'm someone that's at the coalface of looking about trying to always think about how we get buyers and tenants to come to a place. So that is always quite high in our list of things to consider. But yeah, so it might just be. That could just be down to our demographic on the call, really. But certainly for us, that's always important.
I think it was really, it's a very sort of positive response that people are looking to reduce internal friction, improve cross collaboration. I wasn't expecting that to be the joint top response. Equally, demonstrating compliance with policy requirements. I mean, that's a necessity, but it's also, I think, what people really want to do. They want to be supporting nature-led development. Does anybody else have any sort of thoughts on that poll response, Isabelle or Carol?
Just to reflect what you just said, actually, that it's really encouraging to hear that the collaboration and it was high, and yeah, maybe like you say, it's reflecting the audience. However, I think it's a very encouraging result. So
it's encouraging, but we do need to talk about the kind of commercial value and the language. I mean, does the language need to change around nature-led development? Do we need to put it in more commercial terms? And how do we address people and respond when people say, I'm not sure about the business case for this, or the commercial value? It feels as though this is, to the point we were talking about earlier, nice to have rather than need to. How do we demonstrate that this is need to have and use the right language to do so? Carol?
Just picking up on the sales and marketing aspect. Very often the sales and marketing people haven't been brought into the conversation, the discussion earlier in the team. So I think some training for sales and marketing for them to understand how to articulate the benefits to prospective customers is really, really important, and it can work really well. And coming back to the commercial value, to make that hard-edged and say that if a scheme's been designed with nature in mind, it's been integrated fully, it can be much more flood resilient. You're protecting the value of your investment by working with nature into the long term. So it's a good buy.
Yeah, I kind of add into that language. Sometimes we use language in the industry that people don't understand, even down to what is carbon, what does it look and feel like? You're always talking about stuff, and we're talking about biodiversity, turning that into language and a narrative that customers for us actually understand is we have not got that right yet.
So what's the right language then, and how do we build a more compelling commercial case using the right language for nature-led development?
Can I come back in about 6 months? Because something we are actively thinking about, because we are aware you just don't want to sound too either geeky or, we've got to get it into simple, which we know there are politicians in our world just now that are using very simplistic language very powerfully and very successfully, and not often for the right reasons. So we're trying to think, how do we explain what we are doing in a way that is as simple as that and as effective as that? And some of the stuff Carol talked about, your home will not flood, pretty good simple message instead of
not only will it not flood, but it's beautiful. This development is beautiful.
Great point.
Beauty doesn't cost. Good design can be very beautiful, and good design can be really cost effective. So it's the whole. I get very frustrated at times when people talk about social sustainability, economic sustainability, environmental. It's not. It's integrating everything together. You can have it all, but you have to think about the design process at the very outset. And people respond to something that looks brilliant. And when you start to explain, not only does it look brilliant, but it's going to be fantastic to live in, because it sells itself then, I think.
And then the commercial viability is sort of transparent there as well. It's embedded, if you like. Now, we are running very short of time now, and I want to make sure we've got time for one or two questions from the audience. So for a very quick fire response from each of you, what initial step would you recommend for teams beginning their first nature-led project? And how can we encourage people to do more? And a really quick 30-second response. Gary?
Select the right team. Make sure your team are not just going to approach it as business as usual and follow the orthodoxy. You have to get team members that are going to demonstrate to you that they are going to think different.
Perfect. And Carol?
Ask that team, what would good look like?
Excellent. And Isabelle?
I'd add to educate the client on the benefits and make sure that they fully understand how that kind of contributes to a positive result.
Education, love it. Okay, so let's see what we've got from the audience. We've only got time for one or two questions. So we've got an anonymous attendee has just wanted to add an additional reason for why nature-led doesn't follow through, linked to cost, but in my experience, it's more to do with priorities. It may ultimately be cost, but they would rather cut landscape rather than anything else. So I'm not sure that's a question, but it's priorities don't necessarily sort of go hand in hand with cost is a priority, and is perhaps the number one priority. And
maybe it's worth flipping that as a have any of our panelists seen that come up where landscape is the first thing to get cut, and how do you?
That's very good. Yes, thank you.
It's usually always the first thing that gets under pressure, I think. From a commercial perspective, we've always been fighting against budgets, but I think to answer their question, that the use of bringing kind of features that are beneficial, understanding the long-term benefits of nature-based solutions and inclusion of nature and access to nature, the more people are aware of and can see how those things are kind of essential really to placemaking, the more likely we're all going to see that it's not just a numbers game. It's literally trying to invest in the longer term future and making sure that that's understood. So I mean, schools particularly often have a huge budget problem for externals, and it's just tarmac and grass, and they don't even want any trees, not because they don't want any, but they just can't afford any. So the pressures are real, and it's really just being able to make sure that the longer term vision of what we're trying to achieve is understood, I think.
And is itself a priority, or the priority? Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thanks, Isabelle. I'm going to take one more question. We're running a couple of minutes late. I'm hoping everybody will stick around for an extra couple of minutes. Do we have examples of where BNG obligations have been used for river renaturalisation. We've been advised that the formulas are not favourable to such actions, even on riverbank sites at Sheaf and Porter Rivers Trust Sheffield. So this is from Simon Nicholas Ogden. Anyone quickly want to take that?
Probably want to take offline, I think.
Okay, that's quite a big question. We'll take that one offline then. I am conscious now that we are out of time. So I've got a final question for a poll question quickly. Should we quickly pull that one up? So this is for the audience. We've got time for this, Eleni? Do you think?
I think as we're a minute over and I can see people are dropping off.
Are you dropping off? Okay, well, we could share that perhaps afterwards. Thank you, everybody on the panel, for sharing your insights, and thanks to the audience for being so engaged. To sum up, we've discussed a huge number of great initiatives today and sort of responses to challenges. And it's evident that clear nature-based frameworks are essential for moving from policy ambition to delivery on the ground. Building with nature provides the structure the teams need to navigate competing priorities with confidence. Accreditation builds trust by demonstrating credible evidence-led design decisions, and the result is development that performs better environmentally, socially, and financially over the long term. So I'd like to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to the panel for sharing your insights, and thank you everybody for joining and for being so engaged. As I mentioned earlier, the webinar has been recorded and we will share it with everyone in the next couple of days. We hope you enjoyed today's session exploring the new development landscape, nature, resilience and value as much as we did, and we look forward to hearing your feedback.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.